May 7, 1943, Norfolk, Virginia. Obergefreiter Helmut Hörner's boots touched American soil for the first time as he descended the gangway from the transport ship Exceller, his Afrika Korps uniform still stained with Tunisian dust. Around him, 2,847 German prisoners shuffled into formation on the dockside, exhausted from 23 days at sea, expecting, based on every briefing they'd received, to find a nation struggling with rationing and industrial weakness. This cannot be what a country losing the war looks like, Hörner thought, staring at the endless rows of trucks, jeeps, and equipment lining the harbor. No army with supply problems parks this much machinery in one place. The vehicles weren't just numerous, they were pristine. Fresh paint, new tires, no visible repairs or modifications suggesting desperate conservation. Each truck bore a manufacturer's plate: Dodge, GMC, Ford, Chevrolet. Different companies, different designs. As if America had so many manufacturers they could afford duplication rather than standardization. Within 2 hours, Hörner sat in a mess hall at Fort Eustis's temporary processing center, staring at his first meal as a prisoner of war. Roast beef, actual beef, not horse meat or substitute, covered half his plate. Fresh bread with real butter, canned peaches, coffee with sugar. More food than he'd seen in a single sitting since Christmas 1941. He wrote in his diary that night words that German military censors would later suppress. Either we have been lied to about America's condition, or they are fattening us for slaughter. I cannot determine which. The truth was neither. What Hörner had encountered was something German strategic planning had never adequately processed. An industrial democracy operating at a level of material abundance that made the concept of total war nearly irrelevant. America wasn't sacrificing civilian comfort to field an army. America was doing both simultaneously and still had capacity to spare. By war's end, 375,719 German prisoners would pass through American camps, scattered across 511 facilities in 46 states. Each would undergo the same psychological transformation Hörner experienced on that May afternoon. The slow, devastating realization that everything they'd been told about their enemy's weakness was not merely wrong, but inverted. They weren't being held by a struggling nation barely holding on. They were prisoners of the most powerful industrial economy in human history, one that could afford to feed its enemies better than Germany fed its own soldiers. The journey to this revelation had begun 4 years earlier in the conference rooms and strategic planning offices of Berlin, where German military intelligence had fundamentally miscalculated American industrial potential. In 1939, Wehrmacht planners assessed American military capacity based on visible factors. A standing army of just 174,000 men ranked 17th in the world behind Romania. An air force operating obsolete aircraft. Naval construction proceeding at modest peacetime rates. The reports concluded that America, while geographically vast and economically significant, lacked the military culture and industrial focus to pose a serious threat to German interests. Even if America entered the war, German analysts estimated it would require 3 to 4 years before American forces could meaningfully affect the European theater. This assessment wasn't entirely unreasonable based on 1939 data. What German intelligence failed to grasp was American industrial elasticity, the capacity to convert civilian manufacturing to military production at unprecedented speed and scale. When Hörner had departed Hamburg for North Africa in November 1941 aboard the transport ship Ankara, he'd been briefed that American equipment was inferior and American soldiers poorly trained. His officers showed photographs of American tanks with riveted armor, which shattered when hit, and training films showing American recruits marching out of step.
"They have never faced a disciplined European army," his company commander had told the assembled soldiers. "They will break on first contact." The Afrika Korps' first encounters with American forces at Kasserine Pass in February 1943 seemed to confirm this assessment. The U.S. Second Corps, newly arrived and inadequately trained, suffered 6,500 casualties in 5 days. Hörner's unit captured 192 Americans along with their equipment, and this equipment told a different story than German briefings suggested. The captured American soldiers carried M1 Garand rifles, semi-automatic weapons that fired as fast as the trigger could be pulled. German infantry carried Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifles that required manual cycling between shots. The American Jeeps were standardized, interchangeable, mass-produced. Hörner's unit had been using captured British trucks, Italian motorcycles, and German half-tracks, whatever logistics could provide. The Americans arrived with matched equipment from a single supply chain. But what truly disturbed Hörner and his fellow soldiers was the sheer volume. After Kasserine, the Americans didn't retreat permanently. They withdrew, reorganized, and returned 3 weeks later with more men, more tanks, more artillery than they'd lost. It was as if American industrial capacity could simply replace losses faster than German forces could inflict them. By May 1943, when Ramos' forces collapsed at Tunis, Hörner's company had been surrounded for 6 days without resupply. They'd been eating half rations since March. Luftwaffe air support had become theoretical. Allied air superiority meant German aircraft rarely appeared. When Hörner surrendered on May 12, walking into American lines with 167 other soldiers from his battalion, he'd been carrying 42 rounds of ammunition and hadn't seen German mechanized transport in 11 days. The American position he surrendered to had stacked ammunition crates 4 feet high. Their motor pool contained 37 vehicles for a single company. Their field kitchen was serving hot meals twice daily. The contrast was so stark that several German soldiers initially believed they'd encountered a specialized American headquarters unit, not a standard infantry company. The realization that this was normal American logistical support took several days to process. As the transport ships carried captured Afrika Korps prisoners across the Atlantic in May and June 1943, similar revelations occurred in camps across the expanding American POW system. The first major facility, Camp Crossville in Tennessee, received 1,294 German prisoners in March 1943. Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann, captured in Tunisia, wrote to his wife, in a letter German censors would suppress, "The guards live in the same barracks as us, separated only by wire partitions. At night, I can hear them listening to radios, multiple radios, not one per unit, but individual sets. They discuss which radio program to choose, as if entertainment is abundant enough to require selection." Camp Concordia in Kansas received 4,027 prisoners by July 1943. Hauptmann Friedrich Haas documented that the camp newspaper, printed for prisoner use, consumed more paper in a month than his entire regiment had used for official communications in 6 months of North African combat. "They waste paper printing recreational reading material for enemies," he wrote. "This speaks to resource availability beyond my comprehension." At Camp Ruston in Louisiana, 4,183 German prisoners arrived between May and September 1943. Obergefreiter Helmut Hörner, assigned to this facility, kept a clandestine diary describing daily observations. His first medical examination revealed the camp maintained separate doctors for routine care, dental issues, and psychological counseling. "At home, we had one doctor per battalion, handling everything from bullets to disease," he noted. "Here, they have specialists treating prisoners for tooth cavities." The food represented the most visceral demonstration of American abundance. Camp Ruston's German prisoners received 4,000 calories daily, exceeding both American civilian rations, 3,000 calories under wartime rationing, and German soldier field rations, 2,600 calories when supply lines functioned. Hörner recorded his meals for 3 consecutive weeks in June 1943. Monday breakfast: scrambled eggs, 4 eggs, bacon, 6 strips, toast, 4 slices, butter, jam, milk, coffee. Monday lunch: beef stew with carrots and potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, pie, milk. Monday dinner: fried chicken, 2 pieces, mashed potatoes, corn, salad, cake, coffee. "This is not prisoner food," Hörner wrote. "This is better than Christmas dinner in peacetime Germany." The pattern repeated across every camp. At Fort Sam Houston in Texas, 2,872 prisoners noted that the camp guards drove automobiles to work. Personal vehicles, not military transport. At Camp McCoy in Wisconsin, 3,411 prisoners observed that kitchen waste was collected for pig feed, but the quantity of discarded food exceeded what their units had received as rations in North Africa. But the most psychologically devastating observations came from work details. Under Geneva Convention provisions, prisoners could be assigned labor in agriculture and non-military industry, earning 80 cents per day. These work assignments took German POWs directly into American civilian life. Feldwebel Georg Gaertner, assigned to a farming detail near Hearne, Texas, wrote, "We picked cotton alongside Mexican laborers who drove their own trucks to the fields. One laborer owned 2 trucks. He used the older one for work and kept the newer one for family use. A common laborer, with 2 trucks. While our entire battalion in Africa shared 3 motorcycles." At Camp Clark in Missouri, prisoners worked in a shoe factory producing civilian footwear. They discovered the factory was meeting both civilian demand and military contracts simultaneously. The manufacturing capacity wasn't being fully converted to war production because it wasn't necessary. America could supply both civilian needs and military requirements from existing capacity. "They aren't sacrificing," Hörner recorded after visiting nearby Ruston on an escorted shopping trip. The camp occasionally allowed supervised town visits for cooperative prisoners. "The store shelves are full, not rationed goods behind counters, but displayed openly. The civilians complain about sugar rationing, limited to 2 pounds per person per month. 2 pounds? We haven't seen sugar in the field in 6 months."
But by mid-1943, the observations moved beyond consumer goods into industrial capacity, and this was where the psychological transformation became irreversible. At Camp Hearne, Texas, the prison compound sat 11 miles from a rural airfield that served as a training base for transport pilots. Feldwebel Gaertner, working on a farm detail near the camp, began counting aircraft overhead. He tracked them obsessively, filling stolen scraps of paper with tally marks. June 15, 1943, 47 aircraft between 0800 and 1700 hours. June 16, 1943, 52 aircraft. June 17, 1943, 49 aircraft. The aircraft were B-24 Liberators, heavy bombers, not trainers or light aircraft. Gaertner had served with a Luftwaffe liaison unit in North Africa and knew aircraft recognition. These were front-line combat aircraft, and they were being used for routine pilot training. He did the mathematics. If this single rural airfield in Texas was training pilots with heavy bombers, and if those bombers appeared overhead at this frequency, then production rates had to be extraordinary. He calculated conservatively. 50 aircraft per day at one training field, multiplied by training requirements suggesting at least 20 similar facilities. America was producing 1,000 heavy bombers monthly just for training purposes, separate from combat deployment. The actual figures, which he wouldn't learn until after the war, were more staggering. The Willow Run factory in Michigan was producing one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes by mid-1943. Total American production, 18,482 B-24s during the war, plus 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses, plus 9,949 B-29 Super Fortresses, over 41,000 heavy bombers. Gaertner shared his calculations with other prisoners. The numbers circulated through the camp, debated in whispered conversations after lights out. Some dismissed them as impossible. Others remembered their own observations. The endless convoys of trucks on American roads, the fully lit cities visible from camp perimeters at night, no blackout restrictions, the constant flow of new uniforms and equipment for guards. The definitive proof came through a different route. In August 1943, a transport of newly captured prisoners arrived at Camp Hearne from the Italian campaign. These men had been captured at Sicily in July, and they brought more recent observations. Unteroffizier Hans Schmidt described the invasion beaches at Gela. The Americans landed with floating trucks, amphibious vehicles that drove out of the ocean, hundreds of them. We shot at them, disabled perhaps a dozen, and more kept coming. By the third day, they had fuel depots on the beach. On the beach, under artillery fire, they built fuel storage facilities. Because they had so much fuel, they could accept the loss from shelling and still maintain supply. The contrast with German logistics was devastating. Hörner's unit in Tunisia had gone weeks without adequate fuel supplies. American forces were building temporary fuel depots on contested invasion beaches because they had fuel in such abundance that losses from enemy fire were acceptable logistical overhead. But the revelation that shattered remaining doubts came in October 1943, when a work detail from Camp Ruston was assigned to a lumber mill outside Shreveport, Louisiana. The civilian mill supervisor, not understanding the psychological impact of his words, mentioned casually that he'd had to reduce shifts because all our best workers got drafted or went to defense jobs where they pay better. Defense jobs that paid better than civilian work. America had so much industrial demand for war production that civilian facilities couldn't compete for labor. Germany was conscripting every available worker for war industries. America's war industries were attracting workers by paying premium wages. Lieutenant Werner Burkert, a former Luftwaffe transport pilot captured at Tunisia, processed this information and asked a guard about American aircraft production. The guard, a former auto worker from Detroit, explained that his plant, which had built Chevrolets before the war, now produced Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engines for fighters and bombers. "We're running 3 shifts," he said. "Plant never stops. We built 84,000 engines last year." Burkert knew from his training that each fighter or bomber required between 1 and 4 engines depending on type. If one factory in Detroit was producing 84,000 engines annually, and there were multiple engine manufacturers, then American aircraft production exceeded German output by orders of magnitude. That night, Burkert told Hörner, "We cannot win. The mathematics are impossible. They are building more aircraft than we can shoot down, even if we achieved a 1-to-1 exchange ratio, which we cannot sustain." And they are doing this while their civilians eat better than our soldiers. The strategic origins of this capacity gap dated to decisions made years before the war began, when American and German leaders made fundamentally different choices about economic structure. In 1933, when the Nazi Party took power in Germany, Hitler's economic planning prioritized immediate military buildup. Hermann Göring's four-year plan, launched in 1936, directed German industry toward autarky, economic self-sufficiency through synthetic materials, substitute goods, and controlled resource allocation. German synthetic rubber factories produced Buna substitute rubber because Germany lacked natural rubber sources. German synthetic fuel plants produced gasoline from coal because oil imports were uncertain. German food policies emphasized grain production and rationing because agricultural capacity couldn't meet demand for both livestock feed and human consumption. These policies created an economy operating at maximum sustainable output before war began. When war started in 1939, Germany had limited slack capacity, little ability to increase production without reducing civilian consumption or shifting resources from one military priority to another. American economic policy in the 1930s took the opposite approach. President Roosevelt's New Deal programs attempted to stimulate a depressed economy by increasing civilian consumption and industrial utilization. American factories in 1939 operated at roughly 70% capacity, a problem during peacetime, unemployment, underutilized capital, but an enormous advantage if war required rapid industrial expansion. The mathematics were brutally simple. Germany needed every factory operating at maximum capacity just to maintain peacetime standards and build a military. America had 30% unused industrial capacity available for immediate conversion to war production without reducing civilian living standards at all. When America entered the war in December 1941, this slack capacity absorbed the initial expansion. Automobile factories stopped building cars and started building tanks, trucks, and aircraft engines. The workers remained employed. The machinery remained productive. The shift simply redirected existing capacity rather than building new capacity. But American economic planners, particularly those in the War Production Board established in January 1942, went further. They realized that American industrial capacity could expand beyond pre-war levels through multiple shifts, overtime labor, and construction of entirely new facilities. The Willow Run bomber plant, built by Ford Motor Company in Michigan, exemplified this approach. Constructed in 1941-1942, the facility covered 3.5 million square feet, one of the largest buildings in the world. It employed 42,000 workers at peak production, operating 24 hours per day in 3 shifts. The plant produced B-24 Liberators using automotive assembly line techniques, conveyor systems, standardized components, specialized workstations. At maximum efficiency in 1944, Willow Run completed one bomber every 63 minutes. Germany had nothing comparable. German aircraft production remained largely craft-based, with skilled workers building individual aircraft using hand-fitted components. The Messerschmitt Bf-109, Germany's primary fighter, required 15,000 man-hours to build. The American P-50 Mustang required 6,400 man-hours. The German method produced higher-quality individual aircraft. The American method produced 3 fighters in the time Germany produced 1. Albert Speer, German armaments minister, visited German aircraft factories in 1943 and wrote in his memoirs, "Our workers are skilled craftsmen building precision machines. The Americans are building machines that build machines. They have industrialized war production itself." The philosophical difference extended beyond production methods to resource allocation. German planning emphasized efficiency through scarcity, extract maximum military capability from limited resources. American planning emphasized redundancy through abundance, build so much capacity that losses become acceptable overhead. This manifested in equipment design. German tanks like the Tiger I were mechanically sophisticated, expensive, and capable, but difficult to produce and maintain.
American Sherman tanks were mechanically simple, cheap, and adequate, but could be produced in vast numbers, 49,234 built, and required minimal maintenance training. When a Sherman broke down, American doctrine was to replace it rather than repair it in the field. German prisoners observed this during work details at American logistics depots. At Camp Shelby, Mississippi, a work detail witnessed American mechanics discard a truck engine that wouldn't start after 15 minutes of troubleshooting.
They installed a replacement engine from warehouse stock. The broken engine went to depot-level maintenance for evaluation. Maybe repairable, maybe not. But field time was too valuable to spend on uncertain repairs. They have so many engines, they don't bother fixing the broken ones immediately, Obergefreiter Helmut wrote. We rebuilt engines 3 times in Africa. They build new ones because manufacturing is cheaper than maintenance. The cumulative psychological effect of these observations devastated prisoner morale, and through suppressed letters, threatened German homeland morale as well. In September 1943, German military censors intercepted a letter from Obergefreiter Heinrich Schuster at Camp McCain, Mississippi, addressed to his brother serving with an infantry regiment in Russia. They feed us 4,000 calories, while their own civilians receive 3,000 under rationing. This means they produce so much food they can afford this disparity. If they can overfeed prisoners, what does this say about industrial capacity? The letter never reached Russia. German censors, operating under directives to maintain fighting morale, suppressed any correspondence suggesting Allied strength or German weakness. A Wehrmacht High Command memo from October 1943 noted, "Prisoner correspondence from American camps consistently contradicts official information about enemy industrial status. Recommend indefinite suspension of POW mail privileges from American facilities." By January 1944, German censors had suppressed over 1,800 letters from American POW camps, representing roughly 15% of all attempted correspondence. The letters followed similar patterns. From Feldwebel Gustav Krantz, Camp Breckenridge, Kentucky, the guards casually discard cigarettes after 3 or 4 puffs. At home, we saved butts to re-roll with newspaper. They waste tobacco because they have too much. From Gefreiter Paul Hoffman, Camp Shanks, New York, I watched civilians at a railway station buying tickets to travel for vacation during war. They travel for pleasure because fuel rationing still allows recreational movement. From Unteroffizier Wilhelm Fischer, Camp Livingston, Louisiana, the Negro prisoners in the segregated compound receive the same food we do. America feeds prisoners of a race they openly discriminate against the same 4,000 calories as white soldiers. This suggests food abundance beyond our comprehension. The observations became more systematic as prisoners gained English proficiency and began reading American newspapers, permitted under Geneva Convention. The newspapers revealed production statistics that German propaganda had claimed were Allied fabrications. At Camp Ruston, Helmut Hörner began collecting newspaper clippings, hiding them in his barracks. A Life magazine article from March 1944 stated American aircraft production reached 96,118 planes in 1943, more than double German production of 39,807 aircraft the same year. Hörner initially dismissed the numbers as propaganda, until he correlated them with the aircraft he personally observed flying overhead. The numbers, implausible as they seemed, matched observable reality. The production statistics extended across all categories. American shipyards launched 2,700 merchant ships in 1943, 19.2 million gross tons, exceeding total German U-boat sinking capacity even if U-boats achieved perfect efficiency.
American factories produced 29,490 tanks in 1943, compared to German production of 10,700 tanks. American steel production reached 80.6 million tons in 1943, while German production peaked at 28.7 million tons. Every metric favors them, Hörner wrote in April 1944, not by small margins, by factors of 2, 3, 5. And they are fighting both Germany and Japan simultaneously with these resources. The work details provided ground-level confirmation. At Camp Clark, Missouri, prisoners assigned to agricultural work noted that American farms mechanized harvest operations with combines and tractors, while German agriculture still relied heavily on horse-drawn equipment and manual labor. One prisoner calculated that an American farm worker, using available machinery, could produce enough food for 50 to 75 people, while a German agricultural worker fed approximately 30 people. Some prisoners attempted denial. Hauptmann Erich Hartmann, a Wehrmacht officer captured at Normandy and transferred to Camp Shanks in August 1944, insisted American abundance was temporary, that production would collapse once initial stockpiles were exhausted. He organized resistance among prisoners, refusing to acknowledge Allied strength. But by 1945, as war news filtered into camps through newspapers and radio, denial became impossible. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944, Germany's last major offensive, had failed despite achieving complete surprise, because American forces simply replaced losses faster than German forces could inflict them. The Americans lost 89,000 casualties at the Bulge. Within 6 weeks, those divisions were back to full strength with replacement personnel shipped from America. They lose an entire corps and refill it in 6 weeks, Lieutenant Burkert told fellow prisoners. Our replacements in Africa came from training depots already stripped of essential personnel. Their replacements come from an industrial system that produces soldiers like it produces trucks. The final evidence came in April 1945 as prisoners listened to radio broadcasts describing American and Soviet armies meeting at the Elbe River. Germany had been fighting a two-front war and losing both fronts simultaneously. America had been fighting a two-ocean war and winning both theaters simultaneously while maintaining higher living standards than most peacetime economies. On May 8, 1945, prisoners at Camp Ruston gathered around radios as Germany's unconditional surrender was announced. Helmut Hörner wrote that night, "We did not lose because our soldiers were cowards or our tactics were flawed. We lost because we challenged an opponent with 10 times our industrial capacity while simultaneously fighting enemies on every border. The outcome was never in doubt once America committed its full resources. We were simply too ignorant of reality to recognize it."
The final statistics of the POW program revealed the scale of German exposure to American abundance. Between May 1943 and June 1946, 375,719 German prisoners were held in the United States at 511 camps across 46 states. Peak population reached 371,683 in May 1945. The camps ranged from massive facilities like Camp Breckinridge, Kentucky, housing 9,415 prisoners at peak, to small work camps with fewer than 100 prisoners attached to agricultural operations. The War Department spent approximately $240 million annually maintaining the POW program, roughly $640 per prisoner per year for housing, food, medical care, recreational facilities, and administration. This exceeded German expenditure per soldier in active combat zones during 1944, estimated at $480 per soldier annually based on Wehrmacht's budget allocations. German prisoners worked 42.7 million man-days of labor between 1943 and 1946, primarily in agriculture and forestry. They earned 80 cents per day, paid in canteen scrip, totaling $34.1 million in wages. Money they used to purchase items at camp canteens that stocked goods unavailable in wartime Germany: chocolate, tobacco, coffee, razor blades, toiletries, stationery. The medical statistics revealed another dimension of care. German POWs in American camps experienced mortality rates of 0.15%, approximately 570 deaths among 375,719 prisoners. Causes included illness, 223 deaths, accidents, 187 deaths, escape attempts, 98 deaths, suicides, 47 deaths, and various other causes. This mortality rate was lower than German civilian mortality rates during the same period, 0.23% annually from 1944 to 1946, accounting for war-related deaths. Dental care, which Hörner had noted with disbelief, proved particularly significant. American dentists examined all incoming prisoners and provided treatment for existing problems. Records indicate 142,847 dental procedures performed on German POWs between 1943 to 1946, including fillings, extractions, and dentures. "They fixed our teeth," former prisoner Georg Gaertner wrote in his post-war memoir. "This seems trivial until you realize most German soldiers hadn't seen a dentist in 3 years. They provided medical care to enemies that we couldn't provide our own soldiers." The comparative analysis with Allied POW treatment in Germany highlighted the resource disparity. Allied prisoners in German camps, stalags and oflags, received approximately 1,800 to 2,200 calories daily, supplemented by Red Cross parcels when available. German prisoners in America received 4,000 calories from American sources alone, regardless of Red Cross parcels. Medical care in German camps was minimal, constrained by overall Wehrmacht medical shortages. Medical care in American camps exceeded American civil standards in some regions. Survivor testimony years later reflected the enduring impact. In a 1979 interview, former Obergefreiter Helmut Hörner stated, "Those years as a prisoner transformed my understanding of economics, governance, and what made nations strong. I watched a democracy outproduce a dictatorship while maintaining individual liberties, rule of law, and social services. The Nazi propaganda about American weakness was not merely wrong, it was precisely inverted. Everything they told us was weak about America was actually their greatest strength." Georg Gaertner, who escaped from a POW camp in 1945 and lived illegally in America until surrendering in 1985, wrote in his memoir, "I came to America as a prisoner and stayed as an immigrant. The country that defeated Germany showed me what Germany could become."
May 7, 1943, Norfolk, Virginia. The dockside where Helmut Hörner first stepped onto American soil remained active throughout the war, receiving 83,417 German prisoners between May 1943 and May 1945. The journey from that first meal, the steak, bread, butter, and abundance that Hörner thought might precede execution, led to a transformation no German strategic planner had anticipated. These 375,719 prisoners didn't just witness American industrial capacity, they lived within it, worked alongside it, and consumed its output daily for years. They became the world's most thoroughly educated class on the relationship between economic systems and military capability. When repatriation began in 1946, these prisoners carried more than personal belongings back to Germany. They carried detailed knowledge that American prosperity wasn't propaganda or illusion. It was systematic advantage derived from democratic capitalism, distributed prosperity, and industrial methods that prioritized standardization over craftsmanship. Many became influential advocates for democratic reconstruction in post-war Germany. Their eyewitness testimony about American systems proved more persuasive than any occupation directive. When American policymakers designed the Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe's economy, former POWs who'd witnessed American abundance provided ground-level validation that such prosperity was achievable, not merely theoretical. The irony devastates in retrospect. Nazi propaganda had prepared German soldiers to fight a weak, decadent America corrupted by democracy and capitalism. Instead, Germany sent 375,719 witnesses to prove that democracy and capitalism created the strongest economy in human history, strong enough to feed enemies better than Germany while simultaneously waging global war. The lesson transcended World War II specifics. These prisoners learned that economic systems matter as much as military valor, that production capacity ultimately determines victory more reliably than battlefield courage, that a nation's strength derives from distributed prosperity rather than concentrated control. The examination of German prisoners' experience in American camps provides final proof of a principle that military strategists still struggle to fully accept. You cannot defeat an opponent who can afford to treat their enemies better than you treat your allies. And in that single fact lies the entire story of why Germany lost World War II. The prisoners who departed Norfolk in 1946 knew this truth through daily observation. They'd spent years watching America win not through superior tactics or ruthless efficiency, but through overwhelming abundance derived from economic freedom. They returned home carrying knowledge more destructive to Nazi ideology than any weapon: the simple, observable truth that everything they'd been told about strength and weakness was exactly backwards.